Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. As we continue with plant-based experts from Down Under Week, I have a wonderful guest for you today. His name is Dr. Luke Wilson. Please welcome him to the show. It's so great to meet you.
Yeah, you too, AJ. Been really looking forward to it.
Yeah. So who is Dr. Luke Wilson? Tell me about your journey to whole food plant-based eating.
Right. So when I was in must have been about my third year of medical school here. Here, medical school is 6 years. I was sick at home with the flu at that point, this is one of the last times I've actually been sick. After changing to whole food plant-based and everything, it doesn't seem to be an issue for me so much anymore. But all my housemates, everyone was unwell, and I was at home and I was reading. I was really interested in the time in President Obama's healthcare reforms that he was doing. And so I was reading something about that. And someone had put in the comments, President Obama should really read the China study because that's a really important book and he could learn a lot from it. And so I Googled to find out what that was and found out, that it was one of the biggest studies of nutrition that had ever been done. So I was able to find a copy online, funnily enough, at that point, and I started reading, and I pretty much read from start to finish, all like in one day, because it was just fascinating for me because I was in medical school at the time. And so at that point I was learning, there's these diseases, and yes, there's perhaps some things you can do about your lifestyle to try and avoid them, but essentially it's mostly your genetics. It's all inevitable. If you get them, it's bad luck. And particularly, I was really interested when I was reading in the China study about, he mentions in there about Dr. Esselstyn's work around heart disease. And so that one thing sort of led to another. By the time I'd finished reading the book, I'd already ordered, Dr. McDougall's book off Amazon, Dr. Esselstyn's, and I just started sort of avidly reading these books. At the time, I was actually vegetarian myself, and I had been vegetarian since I was 4. I decided, because I had a pet lamb, that I didn't want to eat her, or any other animal like her. So I had been vegetarian for quite some time, but as I got into sort of my teenage years and later, I suppose I was an apologetic vegetarian. And so I always thought, well, this is something I do because it's my choice and it's good for the animals, but it's probably not so great for me. I'm never going to look like the guys on the cover of Men's Health because I don't eat all this animal protein and things. And at the time I was actually going to the gym fairly regularly, and I had on top of my fridge a whey protein supplement that also had some casein in there as well. So of course, never touched that again. It sort of stayed on top of the fridge collecting dust for the rest of the year, and I think I ended up throwing it out. So yeah, so that sort of got me started on my journey. I started reading all those books. I was very interested in research. I'd done a few degrees previously, including a master's in psychology. And so I was really interested, because this kind of resonated with me, I wanted to make sure that it was legit, I suppose, that it was telling the truth. And so I started looking into the references and so forth. And all that I kept seeing was what everyone sees. It's like that thing in the Matrix where they suddenly see everything, and I'm looking at all these different studies and seeing that I'd really been missing a huge part of what could be really helpful for people's health. And to me, that was super important because I was studying medicine at the time. So it completely changed my outlook on health and nutrition, and also what I should be doing. And it kind of, I won't say it ruined the rest of medical school, but it made the rest of medical school tougher because I had that knowledge.
I was going to say, because I remember talking to Dr. Tom Campbell, the son of Dr. T. Colin Campbell, who co-wrote the China study, because he went to medical school after writing the China study. And I'm thinking, how could you, that must have been pretty difficult knowing what you know.
Yeah, it was tough. But the light at the end of the tunnel, there were two things. Firstly, Dr. Esselstyn actually happened to come to New Zealand I think it was about 2010. And I was just on his website one day, and it turned out that he was coming here for a CHIP conference. And so I ended up going up to that by myself. I had a couple of friends at medical school who I trusted, and I had given them, the China study to read and everything. And so I wanted to see if those guys would come up with me. But in the end, I ended up going up by myself. And I actually got the opportunity to meet Dr. Esselstyn and Anne at that. And it was funny because I think there was only myself and maybe one other medical person there at the time. I think a nurse that I used to say I was the only medical person there, but then she corrected me one stage when I met her. But they also, on the second night, or maybe it was even the first night they were there, they said, "Oh, we've got a surprise for you. There's this movie that we've been working on." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's going to be Forks Over Knives." And so I got to see Forks Over Knives. And when I saw that, I was like, this is going to change everything. And so I was just really fortunate with my timing and things. And like I said, if Dr. Esselstyn turned up now, there'd certainly be a lot more people that would turn up to see him, and from the medical profession, I'm sure, and also other plant-based doctors that we have now. But at that point, I was the only one there. And from that point onwards, I knew that, so in my last year of medical school, you get 3 months, and this is always the thing that we look forward to. This is the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel for medical school, is you get 3 months where you can go travel anywhere you like in the world, and you can, so long as someone's there to supervise you, another doctor obviously, is you can go work any hospital you like. So I chose to go to Santa Rosa, California, and spend time with Dr. McDougall and of course Dr. Clapper and Dr. Alan Goldhammer at True North.
That is incredible that you did that. What if everybody did that?
I know. I think we'd have a very different medical profession.
Because you get to see people get well.
Mm-hmm. That was the thing. Once you've seen that, because at Dr. McDougall's, it was just like, I was just basically just running on adrenaline the whole time I was there. I was so excited to be there. And when you're an intern there, or when you used to be able to be an intern there, because I understand, unfortunately, I was watching a show a few weeks ago and they're not doing that anymore for obvious reasons. But that he got you to do the blood pressures for the participants first thing in the morning. And so I was getting up at like 5 a.m. in the morning to do this, which is super early for me. But I was, taking their blood pressures, and I got to see in front of my eyes, like their blood pressure would drop after a few days. And I got to sit in with Dr. McDougall, where he was literally, people would come in with these big bags of pills, and he would say, "Hey, you can get rid of half of these already." And then he would gradually get people off, their pills and supplements during the course of the program. And just the other thing too was just the energy from the participants and the people there, and how excited they were. And same thing at True North, it was all just such positive energy, people really feeling like they were making a big difference to their health and taking charge of their health, which was a complete different scenario from what I was seeing and experiencing at medical school. So that really had me hooked at that point. And I was like, I really hope that I can bring this back to New Zealand at some point, and I can do something useful with this.
Yeah, I commend you for that. That is just wonderful to hear that. How many years ago was it when you first read the China study?
I think it was back in about 2010. Yeah. So what's that, like 12 years ago
That's
now?
great.
Yeah.
Why can't that be required reading in all medical schools?
Well, yeah, we're working on it. I think that's one of the things, Doctors for Nutrition, is, we're trying to get involved with medical schools, and also, of course, teaching doctors about this. And the more we do that, the more likely something like that is to happen, I think. Yeah, it should certainly be part of the curriculum. And of course, I'm always watching what's going on in the States. Dr. Clapper's doing his Moving Medicine Forward program. And I know also there's been some really exciting developments with a few of the universities over there starting to offer either lifestyle medicine programs or starting to add plant-based things. And I think Renee, who you will have had on the show, is she'll probably talk about her involvement that she's had as well with culinary medicine.
It says that you're board certified by the International Board of Lifestyle Medicine. I've heard of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, but I haven't heard of the International Board of Lifestyle Medicine.
Yeah, so basically the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, it's the same kind of qualification as what they came up with. You do the same tests and everything, but if you're not in the United States, then you can't be. Even though I'm a member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, have been since about the time that I was, graduated medical school, and as soon as I could. And that predates what we have now, which is the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine, which I'm also a member of and involved in their New Zealand chapter.
That's nice. I
Mm.
know that you're a general practitioner. What's the difference, Dr. Wilson, between a general practitioner in New Zealand or in Australia or the United States?
Yeah, so a general practitioner in New Zealand and Australia, and also in the UK, we play like a much bigger role in people's day-to-day health, because I know in the States, you can, if you're a kid and you get sick, then you might end up going to a pediatrician, for example. So you go straight to the specialist. Whereas in New Zealand, Australia, the United States, UK, the general practitioners sort of, we kind of almost play a gatekeeper role. And so we see all sorts of things. So I'll see, I might have a child come in, then I'll have someone who's an older person come in. Then you've got all spectrum, and it's men and women and all sorts of problems that you see. So it's actually a very interesting role, and I think that's what probably keeps me doing it, is that it's very engaging. You get to learn a whole lot about a whole lot of different things, and so it's never really boring. And you're always very patient focused. So you're seeing patients one after the other. I'll see on an average day, and I actually see less than the average GP. And there's a good reason for that, because I demand that I have about 20 minutes for a consultation, so that I actually have a chance to do some of this, dietary advice and all that kind of thing as well, because I think it's important. But I'll see still about 18 patients in a day. So you spend a lot of time with people.
That's a lot.
And you're helping them with all sorts of things. So everything from, pregnancy, you will have people come in with their first consultation for that, or, if I look after about, I think I've got, even though I'm only working there very part-time at the moment, I still have about 600 patients that I'm responsible for their overall health. And yeah, so if anyone passes away or anything like that, you've got to go certify them. So you're a big part of you're really their contact with the rest of the health system. So it works quite differently from the States, where a generalist is still like a really useful skill to have, but it's not people's first stop, which is what we do.
So you see people from cradle to grave.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the enjoyment of it, and that's why they like to, especially in the rural areas. And I did do some training specifically in rural areas. People see the same GP, that like they whole generations of families will have the same doctor. And so it's a very different scenario. It's just a different system. I know that I think there are some groups now, maybe Kaiser does a few things like that, where you'll go and see a generalist first or a family doctor, but that's always the way that it's been here.
Yeah, that's really, I like that idea. What's the whole food plant-based scene like in New Zealand? I don't know much about your country and people.
Well, you have to come visit sometime.
Well, I don't even know where it is. I skipped 4th grade and I didn't get geography. I know.
It's right next to Australia. So we're east of Australia, basically. So we consider them to be our Western Island, because we've got a North and a South Island. But yeah, we're very closely tied with Australia, and traditionally. But yeah, so we're in the South Pacific, and it's a beautiful place, and very close to Australia. So if we do get you down for anything with Doctors for Nutrition at some point, it's a very easy 3 or 4 hour plane trip across. Obviously not as easy to travel at the moment, but yeah, the scene here is actually really, really good. There's a lot of doctors here that are whole food plant-based, and we've got several people. We've got a plant-based dietitian who's on our advisory council for Doctors for Nutrition, and we've got Hannah who's on the staff for Doctors for Nutrition. She's a plant-based pharmacist who's down in Nelson. And we've also got doctors all over the country. My friend Nick and my friend Matt, who I'm going to talk about specifically in my presentation about the broad study and things. They they're both practicing, doctors that know about whole food plant-based. There's a whole bunch of us all spread around the country, and they'll probably all be annoyed now that I haven't mentioned them all by name, but they know who they are, and yeah, that's what matters.
Well, I hear we can add a movie star to your resume. You already have the name of an American movie star, Luke Wilson, but you're going to be in a movie called Milk. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it was it's a project by Chris Huriwai and Amy Taylor as the director, and Chris is the protagonist, I guess. It's a documentary that focuses on specifically the environmental impact. So New Zealand we're one of I think we actually are the world's largest exporter of dairy. And so that's a big part of our economy. And so Chris, throughout the film, goes and sort of investigates. It's very much in the same vein as Cowspiracy. And in fact, Keegan Kuhn from Cowspiracy is one of the executive producers, along with Susie Amos Cameron, who's also a good friend. And so so it's basically, looking at the environmental impact in New Zealand, but he also does a lot they talk about, the impact on farmers as well, some of the animal aspects of it. And of course, there's the health aspect too. And so myself, another plant-based doctor, Dr. Mark Craig, who's up in Auckland, which is our largest city in New Zealand, he's also in there. Then another friend of mine, a nutritionist, Shamiz, he's also in the film. And we all sort of have a bit to say about the health aspects of dairy.
Wow.
But it comes out internationally. I think the website is milk.film or something. It's something I'm sure will go in the show notes eventually, AJ. And they are launching it internationally on March the 18th. So very soon.
I hope we'll be able to see it, on something like Netflix or Amazon Prime at some point.
Yeah, they haven't explained what the distribution is going to be just yet, but their goal was to get it as widely seen as possible. And obviously there's some fairly decent firepower there with Keegan and Susie being on board. So we'll just have to wait and see, and all will be revealed, I guess, around March 18th.
Well, that must have been really fun.
It was. I remember Chris came, and I'm sure you have done things for documentaries and that kind of thing before as well. And it's always the same way, where we must have spent 2-3 hours sitting in my general practice and filming, asking me a bunch of questions. And then, you end up being in the film for like, 3 or 4 minutes, which is totally fine. But I just remember when he did that, and must have been at least 2 or 3 years ago now. So I was like, is anything ever going to come of this? But I guess there was a whole lot of story going in the background, and they got the Camerons on board and everything as well. So it sort of went from perhaps being a smaller project into becoming a much bigger thing. And now, is looking at this international release, and it's a really, really great film, particularly for people in New Zealand, because the dairy industry to some extent is almost a source of pride here. And it really just reveals how, in fact, I think one of the stats that he says in the film is that they're actually, as a country, if the dairy industry here was a country, they would pollute more than Sweden does, the entire country of Sweden, as far as the greenhouse gas emissions are concerned.
I don't understand people's love affair with milk. I just don't get it.
Yeah, well, here part of the love affair is because of the money that it makes us. So I guess that's one of the issues.
Yes, the love affair with money. That I understand.
Yeah.
So tell me about this broad study that you were involved in. That sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, well, I've actually got a presentation that we could sort of transition into.
Perfect.
I'm going to talk about that, so perhaps I can share the screen and we can do
excellent.
that. Yeah. Okay, so I've already introduced myself, but the name of the talk today is The Greatest Weight Loss Ever, and you'll find out why soon. So as I've already talked about with AJ, in my last year of medical school, I spent 3 months at True North Health Centre with Dr. Michael Clapper, and also at the 10-day program with Dr. John McDougall. And my friend from medical school, Nick, did the same. And my friend Matt from medical school, Nick, and myself, we all went to Gisborne Hospital after we graduated. And this is Matt's last day working at the hospital on call. and I'm obviously the one taking the photo, and Nick has injured himself. There's a rock slide in Gisborne, which is a natural rock slide, and he's injured himself on one of those rocks, and he's actually receiving some medical attention in the background. So Gisborne is a small semi-rural city on the east coast of New Zealand. One of its claims to fame is that it's the first city in the world to see the sun. And half the people living in Gisborne are Māori. So Māori are the first people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And Gisborne, it's a really beautiful place. It's got some amazing weather. It's got some really nice wineries, so some nice grapes and produce. And it also has really incredible surf beaches. And that was one of the reasons we all decided to go up there, because we thought we were all going to learn to surf. Little did we know we were going to spend so many hours in the hospital. Anyway, so Gisborne also happens to be the most impoverished area of New Zealand. And on the map, you can see the areas that are, the redder the area is, the more economically deprived the area is. And so Gisborne's very red on that map. And also Gisborne is the area of New Zealand with the highest rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes. So every day that we worked at Gisborne Hospital, we saw the effects of diseases that we knew could be prevented and treated with a whole food plant-based diet. So we did the best that we could to let patients know about this. And in a few cases, we did have some great success. I had a gentleman come in who was coming in for a sleep apnea trial, and he needed some equipment for that because the first one hadn't worked. And he was significantly overweight, and I decided I was going to go and talk to him about this. And I took him a copy of Forks Over Knives and also some information that I got from Dr. McDougall's website. So I gave those to him, and I went back in the morning to check in with him and see how he got along. And so he seemed really interested, and he had a few questions for me. And his first question was, if I do this, can I eat quinoa? And I was like, yeah, of course you can eat quinoa. That's great. And he said, oh, that's a really good thing, because I'm really quite fond of quinoa. And he said, I've got one more question for you, and that's, what about kale? And I was like, no, kale's really good. And he's like, well, that's great, because I've just started growing some in my garden. And I was like, this guy's probably going to do pretty well. And he's like, well, I'm going to make a deal with you. I'm going to give this a go for a month, and I'm going to come back and check in with you, and we'll see how I'm doing. And so he did that. He came back in about a month, and to me, he looked like he was doing a bit better. And we didn't know, though, until we put him on the hospital scales, that he'd actually lost 10 kilograms in that first month. And he was absolutely shocked, and so was I at that point too. And so he was really stoked about this. He started talking about going back to the gym, getting back into his exercise, and he continued on with things, and he actually became one of our participant mentors for our board program, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So it wasn't that we didn't get some success with people that we spoke to in the hospital, but we knew all along that there was always going to be much more that we could be doing for people in the community, rather than what we were able to achieve through our jobs in the hospital. So we came up with the idea for the board program, and Nick was able to find a couple of local doctors, Patrick and Bruce, who had links to a trust who would actually fund it for us. So still really grateful for that. And in May of 2014, we started looking for participants, people who might be interested in being involved. And by August 2014, we had 65 people signed up, and the participants had to be either overweight or obese, so a BMI of at least 25. And then they also needed to have, at least one of these health problems that you could say was probably related to their weight. So they either had type 2 diabetes, or they had a history of heart disease, or high blood pressure or cholesterol. Half of them we randomized to do the program first, and the other half, obviously, they were people that were all keen to be doing something, were interested in making some changes for their health, but we had to say to them, sorry, you will get an opportunity to do this if it's successful, but it will be a few months down the line. So we had a control group. So the first group, they attended meetings for 2 hours a night on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We saw them for 12 weeks, And we taught them all about a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet, and we gave them a B12 supplement, of course. Now, after 6 months, the whole food, plant-based group had dropped their BMI by 4.4 points. So they'd had a total weight loss on average of 12.1 kilograms, which is around about 27 pounds. And you can see from the graphs there as well that not only were they able to maintain that weight loss at 12 months, but the ones that we'd followed up with actually had lost a little bit more weight in that time too. So we ended up concluding that, to the best of our knowledge, this research had achieved greater weight loss at 6 and 12 months than any other trial that does not limit energy intake or mandate regular exercise. So obviously the program worked pretty well. Despite, our kind of lack of experience, really. Obviously we've been with McDougall and Dr. Clapper, but that was 3 months worth of experience, and we didn't really have a whole lot otherwise. And obviously the kinds of challenges that you might expect trying to get a bunch of people in a small semi-rural city to, put aside all animal products for that period of time. So how come it was successful, and what can we all learn from the success of the broad participants? Is there anything that we can be doing that we can learn from them to get our greatest weight loss ever as well? So first off, and probably the most important point, is it's the food. So if you know Dr. McDougall and Dr. Clapper, you know that both of these guys have been saying it's the food forever now. And we use their prescription in its purest form. So a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet, which was centered on starch. The reason we do that is it just works. It's almost been 10 years since then that we started the study, and it's still exactly what I recommend. Over the years, of course, we understand better why it works, but the prescription itself doesn't change. We intentionally designed a program that didn't have any exercise, so it was all about the food. And one of the real reasons for this is that we didn't want the exercise to confuse the participants about what the reason was that they were getting the results. And same thing, we kind of knew that at some stage, hopefully this would be published, and we didn't want the general public or academics who were reading the paper to attribute the weight loss to exercise. We also agreed with Dr. Esselstyn that people have limits on how much they can change at once. And so we felt we were best to be focusing on them changing one thing at a time. So that was the food. So my favorite book from last year that I read is Burn by Herman Ponce. I always find his last name really hard to say, AJ, but I know he's been on your show, so people can check out that episode for more information about what I'm going to talk about now. But he's discovered that it turns out that we have what he calls a constrained metabolism. So he spends time with the Hadza hunter-gatherers from Tanzania and in Africa who have a very physically demanding life. And from what I understand, they're about as physically active in a day as we are in a week. Yet the really interesting thing is that they burn exactly the same amount of calories a day as we do. So what Professor Ponce worked out from this is that our bodies find ways to compensate for exercise. So really, it's not a particularly effective way to manage your weight over the long term, at least. So we gave participants this traffic light system, and we asked them to avoid the foods that you can see there in red. You can see also that some plant-based foods fell into this category too. And that's because we were teaching a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet. It corresponds extremely well to the calorie density approach that we had learned from Jeff Novick at the McDougall program, and we also know is extremely effective for weight loss. Nuts and seeds, coconut, avocado, and oils, you can see from this why they were all out. Now, somehow tofu and tempeh, because of their calorie density, managed to sneak into the orange category. Tofu is 60% fat, so I don't recommend it. But luckily for us, this was Gisborne in 2014, so we got away with it. Tofu, even if it was something that the participants were particularly interested in having, would have been in short supply, and tempeh, just forget about it. So you can see that salt and sugar were also used, but they were limited. So they could be used to make the food a little bit tastier, but it also meant that there were foods that could be found at the supermarket, cafes and restaurants locally that were okay for the participants to have. Keeping low fat was really important. So PCRM-led research that you can see there recently has shown a boost in metabolism after meals when people were eating a low-fat plant-based diet. It also seems that our mitochondria, if you think back to your high school biology days, those are the organelles that generate energy for our cells. They seem to actually work best when they're just metabolizing one macronutrient at a time, so either carbohydrates or fat. They don't seem to like the combination quite as much. And we also know that when fat is consumed with carbohydrate, our insulin sensitivity is reduced. And that's one of the reasons that I've put Cyrus and Robbie there from Mastering Diabetes, who are also regular guests on AJ's show. So go check out their episodes if you want to know more about why the combination of fat and carbohydrate seems to reduce your insulin sensitivity, particularly if that's saturated fat, which means that your blood sugars go higher and they stay higher for longer. So keeping low fat was important. Also, many of you will know that overeating carbohydrate is also much less likely to be stored as fat, as it will be stored as glycogen in the liver and muscles, giving you that stamina like you see in Game Changers when James Wilkes goes on those battle ropes and he keeps on going pretty much as long as he can be bothered. So the process of turning carbohydrate to fat is really an inefficient last resort. So you have a much better safety barrier against weight gain when you're keeping it higher in carbohydrates and lower in fat. So came up with the slogan all by myself. I'm pretty pleased with it. But jokes aside, I've put the next point is just do it, because to remind us that the program was very practical and hands-on. So perhaps because of what we'd learned from our own experiences with plant-based, as I've talked about already, AJ, we'd only really started doing that a few years previous. And also our experiences transitioning from medical school, where it's a lot of book learning and following people around like you see on Grey's Anatomy and things, to actually having to do it yourself, that we thought that practical experience is really important. Patrick, who worked as a medical educator, he also insisted that was a really good idea. So we decided that lack of information, as important as information is, of course, that wouldn't be such a great barrier to the participant's success as might be a lack of practice. And if you're plant-based already, then you'll know that there's only so much you can learn from what you read or watch, but it's not really until you start actually making the switch and having to go shopping, preparing meals, checking ingredients, ordering from restaurants, or navigating those social situations that the learning really starts. So our program was 48 hours in total, and they say it takes 10,000 hours to master a skill. So we really didn't have a second to waste. So half the time that they were with us, the participants made whole food, plant-based food. They got in the teaching kitchen and made the food themselves. We had some chef tutors for them, and you can see them making pizzas here. So for these, they needed to learn how to make the dough, the marinara sauce. They chopped up all these vegetables, obviously, that would go well on it. And they also made a nutritional yeast-based cheese sauce that could go on top as well. And so we knew that even if they just made the food and they didn't really listen to us at all when we did our talks to them, they would still succeed. So they were practicing exactly the kinds of skills that they needed to make this work at home. The other half of the time, when we were talking to them, our talks often had a practical focus too. So for example, how to find and check foods at the supermarket, how to order foods at a restaurant, and in the middle there you can see a restaurant meal that was served up by one of the restaurants for the participants. And also we did a whole session on using herbs and spices, foods that you could use to replace animal products. And we even did a version of Doug Lyle's Getting Along Without Going Along to try and help them with social situations. So in the end, eating the food was all the participants really needed to do to succeed. And once they started doing that, they could quickly see it working, and they gained confidence and convinced themselves that it would work. So soon we had people coming back to the group telling stories about being able to reduce their medications. For example, we had a gentleman who was a hard to control type 2 diabetic who was on a long-acting insulin, and he was a forestry worker. And he, in the first couple of weeks of the program, he was able to halve his insulin dose. And then several weeks later from that, he was able to come off it completely, which he was obviously stoked about. He obviously told all the group and they were just amazed. And he also was able to regain his heavy vehicle driver license, which was a big deal for him. And we had another guy who he was a very keen cyclist, and he was telling us stories about how he was now able to beat some of his friends who hadn't been able to beat at racing for years. And then we had another person come and say that she was at the gym one day, and some person that she'd never met before just came up to her and said, "Hey, you're looking great, and yeah, keep on doing what you're doing." And so yeah, so we had these really amazing stories, and you get these in a group of people that are changing over to plant-based. So people are sleeping better, or maybe some aches or pains that they'd had for years have gone away, or you know, they've got plenty of energy, and they're never hungry because they're eating whenever they feel like it, but still losing weight. So we had people sharing all of those stories, and that was really more compelling than anything that we could have said ourselves. So all we really needed to do in the end was get them eating plant-based by teaching them those practical skills, and then the rest largely took care of itself. So my final point is surround yourself, and this is thinking about the environment. And so participants, obviously, in our study were surrounded with the right people for 12 weeks. So they were meeting others with a common purpose twice a week, and they shared in each other's successes, but also in their challenges. And people shared advice and wisdom, food they'd discovered, recipes, and their results were well maintained at 12 months, if not improved, of course. But I still feel that really losing that group at the end of the 3 months was something that really did impact a lot of them. And, you know, that's one of my regrets, is as part of the study protocol that we had to sort of do that. And if I was to do things differently, it would have been really nice to have kept that going some way or another for them. Now, a wise woman once said, well, this is one of my favorite AJ quotes: "If it's in your house, it's in your mouth." And so obviously this is reminding us the importance of the home environment as well. And so we encourage participants to remove red foods from their house, or at least to reorganize their pantries and fridges to create safe spaces. And the first couple of weeks that we had them, actually, we explained that rather than making the changes straight away with their diet, going all in at once, they had that time to be starting to make some of these changes, to their home environment and getting things ready. So it gave them time to work out how they would get these foods out of their house and how to actually do that. We also, as you saw previously, showed them what foods they could replace them with, what they could buy from the supermarket. And we also showed them Rip Esselstyn's Kitchen Rescue DVD for some inspiration. And we didn't go as far as Rip does, as to go into their houses to check and to take things out of the fridge and pantry and throw them out. But we did actually consider doing that. We did film quite a bit of the study. So, and we were making, at least at some point, we were making quite a bit of it up as we were going along. So, but I'm still sure that many of them made quite a few improvements at home, and that this was important. Now, last but not least, so having restaurants and cafes where participants could find low-fat, plant-based food was really important. So love it or loathe it, there's really no denying that going out to eat and also getting ready-made food quickly is part of our modern day culture. So we had 6 different restaurants and cafes agree to place meals on their regular menu, everything from Thai to Turkish. And here I'm ordering a falafel iskender from Rostem. So he realized that falafel had no oils, so he could actually just make it on the grill instead of deep frying it as he usually did. And he also made us some really amazing oil and tahini-free hummus that we could buy to take away, or the participants could. Now, New Zealanders eat a lot of bread, so it was really helpful that one of our chef tutors owned a local bakery, and he started baking some oil-free whole grain bread for us. And also we had a local health food shop that a participant worked at that also began stocking foods that weren't so easy to find in Gisborne back in 2014, things like the cheese sauce mix that they used for the pizzas, nutritional yeast, that kind of thing. So that was really helpful too. So in conclusion, it's really quite simple. For the greatest weight loss ever, just remember these 3 points. Firstly, it's the food. So not only is it whole food plant-based, but it's also low fat, and that's the kind of way of eating recommended by the doctors I've talked about in this presentation. And also, I understand, Chef AJ, that's pretty much the lines that you're along as well. Second point is just do it. So remember that catchy phrase that I've made up, and get hands-on. And so if you're already plant-based, then that might be something like learning to cook without oils, or another skill that I think is really important, and AJ's probably got a lot of tips for how to do this, is making your foods tasty without using those red foods. So without resorting to avocado, coconut, nuts and seeds, or tofu. And the more that you do that, the better you'll get at it, and the more sustainable this will be for you in the long term. And finally, surround yourself. So think about improving your surroundings. So if you can, then surround yourself with other whole food, plant-based people. And obviously there's opportunities to do that now, both in person and online. And remember, AJ's, if it's in your house, it's in your mouth. So no red foods in the house. And if you can manage to find and create some options for when you're out, that's really can be helpful as well, because there are going to be times that you do want to go out with your friends and family. So that was the presentation. So tēnā koutou, ka kite anō, which means thank you very much, and I hope to see you all again. And in the background is a picture of my home city, Wellington, where I am at the moment, actually not too far from where this picture was taken. And this is on a good day. Unfortunately, even though it's summer here, it's not such a nice day today. I'm looking at it at the moment, it's a bit rainy. But hopefully, AJ, there's a few things that some people can take away from what we learned from the broad study participants, and maybe you've got a few questions as well. Yeah. And thanks for the opportunity.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. You know, I mean, as astounding as the weight loss was, all I kept thinking about is that pizza. That looked amazing.
I know. Yeah. And that's I always like to share a lot of the photos that I have, and you know, I'm always reasonably careful not to, you know, we do have permission from the participants to show the pictures and everything, and we've even got some videos and things, but I always think, you know, that picture says 1,000 words really, and you can see how it was sustainable for them because it was fun. They were making things like pizza and many other really tasty foods as well that they were creating in the kitchen there. So yeah, I think we're really lucky that we had people filming. We were hoping to make a bit of a documentary. I think we were just a little bit too early. So we applied for funding and everything for that, and it didn't come through in the end. And it's really disappointing to me that that didn't happen, because nowadays I think you'd have a real good shot of getting that done. But yeah, it's a lot more interesting for people to hear some of the stories and to see some of the pictures of what was actually done than it is to read that paper, as important as the paper is, of course, the academic paper.
Are you still in contact with the participants?
Yeah, some of them I still keep in touch with. Yeah, a lot of them are still doing very well. And it's the same as anything where, you know, almost 10 years down the track, I think once you learn this, you never really go 100% back to perhaps how you were before. But of course, and I did talk about the environment being a really important factor at the end. And of course, you can imagine that the environment in Gisborne and most places in New Zealand, in fact, isn't particularly supportive to that kind of eating. But at least they have the information and the knowledge. And like I said, many of them still doing very well and sticking with it, from what I understand.
Did any of them have any resistance at first? And if so, what was it?
Oh, all of them. You know, we had people, in fact, the gentleman who I spoke about, who ended up having some of the best results and becoming a real, you know, mentor for the program, the one who got off his insulin and everything. I remember that first session, and there was him, and there was this massive guy, really wonderful, you know, gentle, lovely person, but he was huge, very, very tall farmer, who came as well. And both of them, the first session, they just had their arms like this, just folded, because even though we'd given them an inkling about what it was going to be, that they were going to be doing. And so they all signed up knowing that they were going to basically do something along these lines. But they thought that plant-based might still mean that they could have things like cheese. And so I think they thought it was going to be vegetarian. And of course, Gisborne as well, like I said, amazing produce. So avocados just falling off the trees there, people giving them away, they're rotting on the ground. And so when we said also no avocado, a lot of, you know, people were like, goodness, you know. And so I think it was really important for them to get those results, to notice for themselves, hey, this is working, so that we actually managed to push through that for them. And it helped that both of those two that I just spoke about as being, you know, quite resistant and frankly, they looked angry at the start, like they'd been duped or something, that we'd fooled them. And I think it was really helpful that they actually ended up getting some of the best results.
That's fantastic. I always wonder about the low fat piece, if that's more difficult for people than even the plant-based piece, because I know where weight loss is concerned, a low fat approach seems to be unparalleled.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. It obviously takes a bit of time for people's taste buds to adapt, and you probably talk about that. Dr. Esselstyn certainly does. So yeah, we're just so used to having a very, very rich diet, and I think oftentimes when people change to a plant-based diet, or particularly a vegan diet, they basically just, it can end up being just as high in fat, if not higher, than it perhaps was, before they went vegan or plant-based. And I certainly was doing that myself. When I was vegetarian, I was eating a lot of cheese. I was having a lot of milk, and I'd even, my parents, when I started becoming vegetarian, this is New Zealand in the 1980s, AJ, and so it wasn't very forward thinking, and you can imagine with meat and dairy being a couple of our primary exports, there wasn't a lot of information about vegetarianism. And so my parents had said to me, look, you have to keep eating fish and things. So technically I was eating fish as well at times. I never really enjoyed it, but by the time I was a teenager and a little bit past that, I was regularly including fish and things like that as well. So you can certainly still have quite a high fat diet, and I think I did. And nowadays I also do consultations for people, and a lot of the time it is people that are plant-based and they're struggling to lose weight, or they don't have the health results that they want. So it's not just about the weight loss. And even though the broad study ended up being about weight loss, the reason we called it broad in the first place, Nick's idea was that there were going to be broad benefits for people. So it was going to, the people who had type 2 diabetes, they're going to be able to come off their medications and improve their blood sugars. People who had high cholesterol, they were going to be able to drop that. People who had high blood pressure, come off their medications and things. And so what ended up happening is we had a group that was a real, and you might have got the impression from some of the pictures that I showed, that they're a real mix of different characters and all sorts of different health issues. And the one thing they had in common was the weight. And that ended up being, with a smallish group size, what we could publish about. But, there's a huge number of success stories. Every one of those participants had made some amazing changes to their health, and had noticed some big differences there. So it wasn't just about the weight loss, but that's kind of how the study ended up being, I suppose, pigeonholed as a study on weight loss.
Yeah, well, that's they got to eat delicious food. They didn't have to weigh and measure or count. And I mean, what could be better?
Exactly. That was constantly the feedback we got. They absolutely loved that, is that they didn't have to think about it. They weren't ever hungry. They didn't feel restricted or anything. And I know there's a few things in there that you would say, and I agree, that they still got to have that weren't optimal for weight loss. But you can see just getting that whole food, plant-based and low fat part was enough for many of them to get, incredible results for their health. And then these extra things that you can do to improve the weight loss even further. Well, those are sort of things that you do if obviously you've got the rest of it sorted first.
I'm just curious, were you instructing the participants to do exercise or just to continue with whatever exercise habits they have? Because I know you've done something with gyms in your area.
Yeah, I have. So we really made a point of not talking about exercise. We had one session where we had a physiotherapist come in and sort of give a little bit of information about that. But the funny thing is, it's like that guy that I spoke about right at the start who'd come in for the sleep apnea trial. I didn't have to tell him to exercise. He sort of came in, he's like, oh, I'm feeling good. I think I'm going to try and, start going to the gym again, and I'm going to go into the pool. So once people start feeling good again, they start kind of doing that kind of thing for themselves. I'm pretty sure we did some analysis on it, and there wasn't really any difference in their exercise over the course of the program from when they started. And though they don't quote me on that, but there was no emphasis on it other than that one session that we did. And so people probably picked up a little bit along the way, But we really said to them, focus on the food. This is about the food.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you do with the gyms? I know you've run some
Oh yeah.
programs or some challenges in your local area.
I'm actually starting another one very shortly. So it's a local gym that basically does a lot of exercise classes and group workouts and things. Not CrossFit, but similar kind of idea to that kind of thing. Where you've got those group workouts and a really, really friendly, nice atmosphere there. And they were interested in starting a plant-based program. And so, after the game changes, everything like that, like a lot of people here have watched that and become interested in going plant-based. In fact, I've had people turn up to my general practice not realizing how interested I am in this and saying, oh, I've watched this film, The Game Changers. What do you think about if I do that? I'm like, yeah, that's a really good thing to be doing. But so I've worked with them. We basically did a very similar thing to the broad study where I did some initial measurements, blood pressure, cholesterol, obviously their weights and everything. I also did their A1C, so measure of insulin sensitivity essentially, or their blood sugars over time. And we did that at the start. They did an 8-week exercise program where they were doing, trying to get them to do a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet or as close to that as possible. Basically getting rid of the fear of carbs is a big part of it for that demographic, as you're probably aware. And then we got some really amazing results in terms of not only their weight loss, but their energy levels, and even found someone who had quite high blood pressure. And this is an age group. It's probably average age of those people is probably somewhere between sort of 25 and 35 or something like that. So it's a much different age group demographic than what I work with the broad study. But she had quite high blood pressure, and that had dropped. I actually did. Because it was that high, I said, well, I'm going to check it again for you, in a few weeks' time, and we'll see that it's making moves in the right direction. And it had dropped significantly. One of the personal trainers there, in fact, had a pretty high cholesterol, and he managed to drop that within a few weeks as well, back down to a normal level. So it's really interesting working with younger people, because you see a different, that they're interested in different things. So I'd send them out emails every week to check in and to be giving them more information about different macronutrients, what supplements they would need to be taking and that kind of thing. A few sort of motivational videos and things, and some recipes, obviously. And so giving them all that kind of information, resources that they needed to do it. But it's a really interesting group of people to work with, and I'm really looking forward to the second program. And it's cool that they wanted me back again, because it was successful.
So reassuring to know that people in your country are also afraid of carbs. And I never understood. People are afraid to eat potatoes, rice, and beans, yet they'll slather olive oil all over their food and eat animal secretions. So it's really upside down, but good to know that it's not just the United States where people have that carbophobia.
It's something we're working on.
Yeah. Hey, so what is this? 2 zesty bananas. It sounds like a comedy movie.
I know. So it was me and Matt that I talked about a little bit at the start of the presentation. We decided we would start our own business doing, I suppose, nutrition consultations, lifestyle medicine, if you like. But I like to say nutrition rather than lifestyle medicine, because that's mostly what I do. And I think nutrition's the most, it's kind of like the keystone piece of lifestyle medicine anyways. But so we were going to start our own business up. I actually wanted to aim it more at that kind of demographic that I've just been talking about with the gym. So kind of younger people, because there's a lot in plant-based already. Obviously thinking about heart disease or diabetes, these kinds of conditions that you might develop when you're, if you're unlucky, you might develop them when you're quite young. But a lot of people won't get there until they're maybe in their 50s or 60s or things. And so I think a lot of the plant-based message kind of caters to that slightly older demographic, because when you're young, you're invincible and you're not thinking about, well, maybe my blood pressure's high, or my cholesterol's high, or I might have a heart attack or a stroke. That's not very motivating. So the idea was one of the things that I wanted to do with it was sort of aim it at a younger demographic, make things a bit more fun. I didn't want it to be like, I don't know, plant-based medicine or something like that. Just medicine's serious enough as it is. So we thought having a silly name, kind of an easy one to remember. We'd also be able to find a .com very easily, which turned out to be the case. And bananas were Matt's favorite fruit, so we thought, why not? So that's what I've kept the name. People either love it or hate it. And
cute. I bet it sounds like I was thinking like, oh, it's a comedy with Joe Pesci.
Yeah, exactly. Or I've heard, people are like, oh, it sounds like a daycare center, or it's like whatever. I don't mind.
It's definitely memorable though. So people,
yeah, exactly. So it's a bit different from what everyone else is doing. So, and I admittedly, as I sort of did the broad study, then I came back to Wellington, moved back down here, and I actually did some work on another. It was going to be sort of a study with people who had who were at risk of stroke, with a friend of mine who's a neurologist who's actually moved back to the States now. And unfortunately, we got some really good results with the first group that we had, but it wasn't large enough for us to end up continuing on with that and publishing or anything like that. So I did that. And then I got into doing general practice. And when I first started doing general practice, there's a steep learning curve. And so the two zesty bananas thing took a bit of a back seat for a little while, but I'm sort of getting back into it now. So if people want to give us a follow on Instagram or Facebook, I'm actually back on the social media and stuff. So yeah, so there'll be more content there and things for people to check out.
Wow.
But I'm here to promote Doctors for Nutrition, so don't forget their website as well.
Oh yeah, well, yes, please. If you'd like, tell us a little bit more about your involvement with them. And do you only work with people in New Zealand?
So it's an interesting question, actually, because I've seen people on your show, and there's obviously, I think it depends on how you sort of frame what you're doing. And so with the two zesty bananas consultations that I do, I don't frame myself as being, this is a medical consultation to replace your regular doctor. It's a nutrition consultation to supplement what you've got from your regular doctor, which usually is not very much around nutrition. But I'm not diagnosing people. I'm not ordering lab tests for them or anything like that when I do those consultations. It's purely sort of a let's talk about changes that you can make in your lifestyle, and particularly with your nutrition. So I don't see any issue personally, and I do have liability insurance for New Zealand. And funny thing is I did talk to them about exactly what I was going to be doing when I started doing what I'm doing now, and they seemed fine with it. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not turning away people from overseas, but it does tend to be people from New Zealand who get in touch. And there was another part to that question that I forgot because I rambled a little bit long, I think.
Oh, I did, about Doctors for Nutrition in general, your affiliation with them, how you came to work with them and what you do for them.
Yeah, well, I'm actually on this show in the first place.
Yeah, so we forgot about it completely.
I know, sorry. Yeah. No. And always top of mind for me, Doctors for Nutrition. I've got their t-shirt on, as you can see. Probably most of us this week have been wearing it. So my role for them at the moment is as a board director. And so I provide, along with, we've got 3 other directors. Helene's one of them, Cherie and Terry as well. So there's 4 of us, and we obviously oversee the governance and the direction of the organization, which doesn't sound very exciting, but we had a whole meeting yesterday about our strategy, where we're going to take things and everything. And that's the kind of stuff that I really get into, that big picture stuff. I suppose providing some guidance for what might be good directions for the organization to head in. And yeah, that's kind of what I do for them at the moment. But we also, Helene and I also provide quite a bit of nutrition and medical oversight of what goes on with DFN. And so I was quite, I write articles every now and then that go on the blog and things. We publish some in a magazine here called Nourish. So I wrote one that came out about a month or so ago. We also do we've got a practitioner's guide, which is the whole point of that is supposed to be educating GPs like myself about how to prescribe whole food plant-based nutrition and giving them the tools. And so obviously I had quite a big role in how we're actually going to make that happen. And we got to go up to, I went with Hannah and Fuchsia, who's the dietitian, plant-based, on our advisory council here. We went to the largest GB conference in New Zealand last year. It must have been about June or so, I think, which was in person at that point. And we got to, interact with a whole lot of GPs. The Doctors for Nutrition t-shirts were super popular, sold a few of those, and we gave hundreds and hundreds of copies of those practitioner guides out, and we had some really good conversation. So that's, I guess, I have sort of a couple of roles that I do with Doctors for Nutrition, but that's, obviously a more serious role than Tuesdays to Bananas, but it's nice to have both, have a bit of balance. That's
great. If people wanted to support your work or get to know you better or follow you, where do you hang out the most?
Good question. Probably, I'm starting to do a bit of a newsletter and things. You can sign up for that on the website. Like I said, I took time off because I'm not very interested in social media from a personal perspective, but then I realized actually, I might have all these, what I think at least, are good ideas and thoughts and help that I can provide for people. And if I'm not present on social media in some way or another, then they're not going to get that information from me. So that's a way that I can provide that value for them and provide that information. So I'm becoming a lot more active on Facebook and Instagram and even Twitter now. But that's sort of a work in progress. So people can get in touch with me any way that they like to there, or just flick us an email through the website. I'm definitely not like Dr. McDougall, where I remember I would see him when I was at the program. I was always amazed. He'd be responding to emails, and always the joke was Dr. McDougall's, replied to your email before you've actually finished.
Before you hit the send button. I know, he's incredible. I wish I knew how he did it.
Yeah. He's an inspiration. But so I'm not that good, but I do get back to emails and things too at the moment.
That's great. Well, we'll put everything in the show notes. So thank you so much for your work. And this was a wonderful presentation. I can't stop thinking about that pizza. So hopefully you have somewhere.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see you in the movie. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you.
And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow for another great show.